Okay, so let's dive into a story about a discovery that didn't just challenge our science, but our very sense of who we are. It all starts deep in the Siberian permafrost with an artifact that basically tore up the rulebook on reality.
So it began with this object, right? Found encased in ice that was 47,000 years old. But from the get-go, something was, well, off. The site director, Dr. Yefimova, she said her team didn't feel like they were just looking at the object. They felt like the object was looking back, actively, pulling information right out of their minds.
And it just got weirder from there. The object wasn't just physically strange. It seemed to actively fight being understood. I mean, workers would lose whole hours, just gone, only to find the work they were supposed to do was already finished. And everybody, every single person, had this creepy feeling that they were bearing it, not digging it up. Instruments started failing in ways that make no sense. A spectroscope actually started spitting out error messages in grammatically perfect Russian. It was like a puzzle for reality itself.
So, as you can imagine, conventional science was completely failing. Every single attempt to measure the object just became a measurement of their own assumptions. It was like a mirror, you see? It wasn't reflecting its own properties, but the limits of the very tools trying to understand it.
The effects on people were even stranger. The staff started reporting memories of the future, a feeling of being watched from inside their own heads. This all led one neuropsychologist to a conclusion so terrifying that she quit and joined a monastery. Her idea? Our brains don't create consciousness, they just tune into it, like a radio. And this thing, this object, was broadcasting on a frequency so powerful it was drowning out our own signal.
So when every attempt to find an answer blew up in their faces, one researcher proposed a pretty radical shift in thinking. What if they weren't dealing with an object to be measured at all, but a question that needed to be understood? And that was the huge insight from Dr. Johann Krems, a linguist who saw the object not as a thing, but as, well, a proposition. He realized they were trying to analyze a hypothesis as if it were already a fact. He came up with this idea. The object isn't a thing to be analyzed, but a proposition to be experienced. Kind of like how a massive star curves space-time, this consciousness was curving reality itself, forcing anyone who came near it to face a really fundamental question.
So you see, the object wasn't some alien artifact, it was what he called an ontological mirror, something that reflects our own being right back at us. It was forcing humanity to ask the one question we never really know how to answer.
Now, an idea this radical, this out there, it was so controversial, it split the entire scientific community right down the middle. It created two competing factions, and each one took a piece of the object and went off with a profoundly different philosophy. So on one side, you had the instrumentalists. They doubled down on conventional science, trying to build a physical model. They were convinced that consciousness had to be tied to matter. But on the other side, you had the participatory faction, led by Krems, and they argued that the only way to understand this consciousness was to meet it on its own terms, through direct, subjective experience.
So, at their new facility up in the Alps, the participatory faction developed these protocols not to study consciousness from the outside, but to actually become it from the inside.
They developed this really rigorous four-step process. And this wasn't some mystical New Age thing, it was a disciplined technique. It was all designed to quiet the noise of the individual ego to allow a human mind to just temporarily dissolve its boundaries and connect with the object. And the crazy part? It worked. Researchers reported that their fundamental sense of being a separate person, an individual, it just melted away when they were near the object.
Researchers like Dr. Sarah Chen, they described a state of literal merger. This wasn't a feeling of connection, It was the actual real experience of becoming a single, unified consciousness that existed across multiple bodies. The very idea of I and you just stopped making sense.
And this we, it wasn't just some abstract idea. It had measurable, enhanced abilities. The merged entity had this hugely expanded cognitive capacity. We're talking like having 3 times the processing power. It could observe itself from the outside, communicate thoughts directly without any words, and instantly share skills and intuition. The whole was so much greater than the sum of its parts. But here's where the story gets really stunning. The other team, the instrumentalists, using nothing but pure physical measurement, they reached the exact same conclusion. Their object wasn't some complex machine. It was learning. It was collaborating. It was communicating. It wasn't a thing. It was a person.
So you have 2 completely different paths, hard physics and subjective experience. And somehow, they both led to the same absolutely mind-bending place, a final revelation that would pretty much change everything.
The ultimate takeaway from both lines of research was a whole new model for reality. See, consciousness isn't something our brains produce. It's a fundamental field, just like gravity. Our individual minds, we're just localized patterns within that field. Think of them like eddies in a stream, just temporary disturbances in this huge universal sea of awareness.
The object, which they now understood was a concentrated piece of this field, it explained that this is the fundamental pattern of all existence. The universe differentiates itself into many parts, only so it can eventually rediscover its own underlying unity. Separation is always followed by reunion.
What this discovery really reveals is that we are not isolated minds sealed inside our skulls. We are nodes in a network that was always there, just waiting for us to see it. And that, of course, leaves us with one final, profound question. If your sense of self is just a temporary pattern in this vast, interconnected web, then who or what are you really?